Hello, welcome to our guide on creating a bowtie diagram, a powerful risk assessment tool. If you were hoping to learn about tying a formal bow tie, well, you're in the wrong place. Also, if you're not familiar with a bowtie diagram or the terminology, you may get a little lost. So start with our video, what is a bowtie diagram, if that's the case. In this video, we'll walk you through the 7 steps to create a bowtie diagram and we'll build one together. For our example, we'll assess the risks at Dinosaur Park, a thrilling new visitor attraction that's recently opened, and I guess I should mention that is no way inspired by any other genius works for cinema. So, Dinosaur Park features a mighty T-Rex, a perimeter wall, a command centre, various manuals and visitors. While it might seem exciting, we're here to identify potential hazards that could lead to unwanted incidents. Okay, now let's dive into the 5 key steps for creating a bowtie diagram. Step 1, establish potential risk. Our first step is to establish potential risks. We start with what's called the hazard, which is what could cause harm to people, equipment, the park's reputation, etc. In our case, it's the angry T-Rex locked in a cage. Make sure to provide context about its controlled state, situation or size, ensuring that the audience understands its nature. Simply T-Rex would be too broad. We then add the top event. This is where the control over the hazard is lost. So for our example, our top event is T-Rex escapes from cage. This is one of the most crucial points of the exercise to get right. The top event shouldn't be a consequence because at this moment, nothing bad has happened yet. It shouldn't be too narrow that there is only a single consequence, or indeed too wide a bearing that there are dozens of consequences that may stem from the incident. It is also possible for a hazard to have multiple top events. For example, the T-Rex could also start aggravating other dinosaurs in the park. Each bowtie diagram has just one top event, so a second would require another diagram. Step 2. What are the consequences? In step 2, we start to add the consequences. Now that we've established our top event as angry T-Rex escapes from cage, it's time to think about the consequences. These are the potential harms or damages that could result from this top event. Remember, a top event can have many consequences. While we often focus on the major ones, don't forget to consider all possible outcomes. It's crucial to provide enough context when describing these consequences. Terms like injury, damage, or leak may not always offer sufficient detail. Conversely, getting too specific can lead to unnecessary splitting of similar consequences. For example, whether you are stepped on by our beloved T-Rex or eaten, it doesn't really matter, it's ultimately the same consequence. And so we'll add our consequences to our diagram now. You can check this out on our website, actually, link in the description below. Step 3, ask, what are the threats? Moving on to step 3, we examine the threats. At this point, we've covered the top event and its potential consequences. The next critical element is identifying the threats. These are the factors that could lead to a loss of control over the hazard, thus triggering the top event and resulting in undesired consequences. Identifying all potential threats is essential and can often be more difficult than identifying consequences. For this reason, it's often done through brainstorming sessions where team members share their insights. Just like with consequences, it's important to provide ample context when describing threats. Your audience should clearly understand how each threat could directly cause the top event. Threats can originate from various sources. They can be failures, external influences, or operational issues. For example, in our scenario, the cage may be left open in error by the park rangers. The cage itself might not be strong enough to contain the T-Rex. The cage could be deliberately opened by some of the suspicious characters. Now, you can really see the bowtie diagram start to take shape. Let's move on to the next step. Step 4, add barriers, preventative. Now let's move on to step 4, where we introduce barriers on the left-hand side of the bow tie designed to prevent the top event. They're like the gatekeepers of safety, standing guard. Let's zoom out for a second. When describing barriers in general, it's essential to do so correctly. Barriers should meet 3 criteria. They must be effective, independent, and auditable. This means that each barrier should be capable of effectively blocking the top event on its own, not reliant on other factors. Barriers can take many forms, from passive ones like walls to active ones like detectors or alarms. They can be hardware, software, or human-based, and some might even involve procedures. In our dinosaur park scenario, we might have preventative barriers like cage design, cage locking procedure, competent zookeepers and lock on gate. But beware, a common mistake is assuming that a procedure alone is a barrier. A procedure is just a piece of paper. It meets the criteria of a barrier only when it's in the hands of a trained and competent person. An active barrier, for example, could be a sprinkler system. However, it's not just the sprinklers, it involves a chain of events. It starts with a smoke detector picking up traces of smoke, then a computer system deciding to activate the sprinklers. All of these are components of a single barrier. If the smoke detector fails, the sprinklers won't activate. It's a system and all parts must work together. Step 5. Add barriers. Mitigative. In step 5, we look at mitigative barriers on the right-hand side of the diagram, those that come into play after the top event. These barriers are designed to prevent or minimize the consequences of the top event, like a backup plan to limit the damage. If our preventative barriers are successful in stopping the top event, the mitigative barriers won't need to be deployed. So in our dinosaur park case, we could have barriers such as the park alarm, park emergency team, emergency exits, security team equipment, park media spokesperson and insurance. With all these barriers in place, we're better equipped to handle any situation and ensure the safety of our visitors. Now we've got a real bow tie diagram on our hands, and while you may be tempted to stop there, these next 2 steps are what can take your bow tie diagram to the next level. Starting with step 6, add degradation factors and controls. What's a degradation factor, I hear you ask? Well, they are conditions or situations that can compromise the effectiveness of a barrier. Use them sparingly though, and keep them to representing only the most significant threats to barrier integrity. So let's take our dinosaur park example. A degradation factor could be emergency exits blocked, which is now compromising the effectiveness of the barrier emergency exits. Get it? But don't worry, degradation factors have controls that can prevent them from weakening the barrier. Sticking with our example, a degradation control could be routine inspections of emergency exits to make sure they remain clear. Now, it can be easy to confuse a degradation factor with a threat, as after all, they are similar in many ways. Fortunately, we have a video on that very subject matter, link in description below. Right, onto our final step. Step 7, metadata. We here at Bowtie Master love adding metadata. For those who don't know, metadata is just a word that basically means information about information. Think of the tags that you might add to a social media post or descriptors to categorize your media. So tag your diagram elements, but in particular your barriers, with relevant details about its health, owner, type, performance, standard and more. This way, readers of the diagram will have enough context to gain a clear picture of risk without having to ask loads of questions. Remember, the diagram's aim is to communicate a complete picture of the risks, and metadata will fill in any of those gaps. Okay, so these are the 7 steps, but how do you actually put them into practice? Design. When it comes to designing your diagram, there are various tools available. You can use our PowerPoint and Excel templates, which are free to download. You can find the link in the description below. In this video, we've been using Bowtie Master. It's easy to use, and you can even try it for free today. If you need some guidance, don't hesitate to book a demo with us. We'll give you a quick run through of how it works. And there you have it, the 7 essential steps to create a bow tie diagram. Add any comments below for what you want to be included in the next video.